Hello everyone, and welcome to the final CSM interview. And this is a very interesting one, and one I had to think about whether I wanted to release or not, as Cable Uta, the candidate that we will be interviewing today, wasn't actually successful in his application to become a candidate for this CSM election. However, I decided that it would be important to at least let him talk about his platform and get his points across to a wider audience, even if he wasn't able to become a candidate for the upcoming election. With that disclaimer said, let's let the candidate introduce themselves.
My name is Cable Yuta, and I am an FC in a leadership role in We Form Volta, who lives and based out of Thera. So the majority of the time we spend is in either in Thera or in Nullsec, where we most likely are shooting innocent crabs who deserve punishment for bad things. And I started this game in 2011. And yeah, it's pretty much very short my story.
Alright, well, with that said, let's just dive into the interview then. So one of the first sessions that the CSM will typically have at a summit is a meeting with the upper leadership of EVE Online's development team. Typically, during this, the CSM as a whole has tried to present a small list of 3 to 4 points that all members agree need work on during this. What is a point that you think that you could convince the rest of the CSM deserves to be on that list for your first summit?
I think that one of the things that people would definitely agree on is that the subcapital meta needs to be shuffled up, and that CCP needs to have a dedicated balance team, which they've also previously introduced and said they would make. However, as far as the community knows, this has not really happened, since it seems to still be a few individuals doing it on a part-time basis.
During CSM 12, I was asked to present a list of 3 areas that I thought CCP could gain a lot out of working on in order to spur discussion within the CSM. If you were put in a similar situation, what would be the 3 things that you would bring up to talk to with the group?
I would probably tell them that they, to an extent, need to reinstitute a level of a community team, because even though there is really hard to put like a monetary value for the company to see like like a community team makes this amount of money for us, I think that a new community team and a balance team for that matter would give great value to the game as well as the company, because I'm pretty sure that people would, at least on Reddit, be a lot more positive if they saw that things were actually going in a way that generated new engagement and new spirit to the game to an extent.
Okay, so that's number 1, community team. What's 2 and 3?
Number 2 would, to an extent, be I wouldn't say like a hard a solution. Somehow fixing the botting issue is obviously there, and I'm pretty sure that most candidates would say the same. However, I recognize that that's not something that you can just go and, unless you actually have a solution, which I sadly do not. I wish I did. But I think honestly, it would probably be similar to my first answer, in the sense of balancing in general in the game, and having regular updates that actually generate a shift in metas, so we don't have stalemates like we've essentially had for the better part of over almost a year actually. So essentially a general sense of balancing around all kinds of combat.
Okay, and what's your third?
That's a hard one. I would honestly probably say capitals again, and potentially capitals and super capitals. Because I think that the changes that they've done and introduced recently with capitals, they're a step in the right direction. However, I feel that they are not necessarily enough. And if you want me to go specifically into it, it'll be a very long conversation. So I'll just say that I think that there's needs more work on capital rebalance.
In my opinion, an important part of being a member of the CSM is being able to explain gameplay patterns or uses of mechanics that feel broken to CCP, in order to explain why you think that they're not something you feel is healthy for the game. Can you describe something that you have experience with that you perceive to be broken, or at the least overpowered, and explain why it is so in your view?
Certainly. Um, the most obvious example that springs to mind is Rocals. And when I say Rocal, it's not actually the ship. I am referring more to the panic mod, which has been an item of big controversy and big amounts of conversations and big amounts of salt and so on and so forth. And the simple reason for that is that, in my opinion, it is a poor chosen game mechanic where you allow for any kind of ship or character or whatever you'd call it in any game have invulnerability for an extended period of time, which from a view of other game developers, not from CCP but from other games entirely, has referred to that as just a overall bad idea because it always causes a lot of grief and a lot of complaining.
Can you go into more detail about what the specific problems are with the mechanic?
I think it's a simple factor that you have a ship that, at no cost of anything, effectively, makes itself and its underlings, in this case, other mining ships on the grid, invulnerable for an extended period of time, being, even after the nerf, being, I think it's 6.5 minutes. While there essentially only exists any other example of this in the game, which is the hull energizer, which allows for, I think it's between 10 and 18 seconds, depending on T1 and T2 and so on, of hull protection, which is not even at the same scale of the panic mod. But on the other hand, the hull energizer has its downsides, while the panic module does not. It simply allows for a reactionary force that gets effectively minimum 6.5 minutes of prep time, which in most cases means that Rocals practically never die, assuming they are under an umbrella of any kind.
The CSM has to give input on many things, even on things that aren't normally thought of as coming under the CSM's purview, such as UI design. In fact, a meeting with the UI team, Team Psycho Sisters, is a part of most summits. As such, can you describe a part of the UI that you interact with heavily, and identify a problem with it when used in the way that you operate it?
I wouldn't necessarily say there is a problem per se. Well, that's not true. There is a issue which has been known actually for quite a while, and for some reason still has not been resolved, which is that when entering a new system, there is relatively often, and I say relatively because it's not always as common as other times. You sometimes have an issue of the HUD loading the icons of various, like for instance, anomalies in space and citadels in space and so on and so forth, which causes a large amount of grief for especially hunters in nullsec and similar places, because it simply limits their ability to actually get to where they need to go because these things do not load, which means that they have to refresh the HUD and then wait the couple of seconds for the HUD to essentially boot up again. I think that's the only obvious UI issue I can tell you that I find is broken right now.
So, monetization is often a dirty word within the player base. However, as you're running for the CSM, you hopefully understand that it's a necessary part of CCP continuing to exist, while still something to be safeguarded against becoming too rampant. What is a new area of monetization that you would argue against, and what would be your argument to convince CCP on why it shouldn't be done?
I think that the where we are currently, of it just being skins and being cosmetic upgrades, essentially, I think is to an extent fine. I understand the business aspect of it, and that's completely fair, because I mean, obviously they are a company and they want to create revenue and they want to create profits for their shareholders and so on, and I completely understand that. And I am happy that CCP has not gone past the boundary of it being cosmetic. Because if CCP decide to go past that boundary and essentially make it so that you can spend money and get an advantage over other players or something like that, I think that's at that point, that's where the quote unquote Eve dies. Because I think if you go back past that threshold, I think there's no turning back, and at that point you essentially lost it.
And I think you got
I
there.
think that essentially it means that if you went and allowed for someone to gain a benefit over others by paying a sum of money, it would effectively turn this game into pay to win. Considering we have a player base who are to an extent pretty fanatical, and a large group within the game, as far as I know, and what I've experienced, are very well capable of paying for such an option and are very much willing to. And it would essentially mean that groups of massive groups with the game, as we know there are major coalitions, will always have the advantage because they will simply be able to fund it, in the sense that they can group fund to paying for this advantage for X amount of players or something like that as a group, which again would lead to the whole N+1 being the stronger part, simply because they can pay to win because we have more people willing to pay.
Do you have any plans for what you would do if you were elected to the CSM in order to differentiate yourself from the other council members?
I don't necessarily know exactly what I would do in that sense, but I'd like to think that I have a different view on problems and finding solutions to problems than most other players in general. Um, at least as far as what I've been told from others about me, that I am capable of finding solutions very often that others don't really see, and don't quite, to some extent, don't even understand when proposed, simply because I am as dedicated as I am to the game and capable of adapting and putting myself in other people's shoes, and putting myself out from just my own purview, essentially. So I think the most of it will be probably a level of creativity, I guess, to resolving issues.
So for my final directed question, what other non-incumbent candidate would you most like to see elected, either alongside yourself or in place of yourself, should it come to that?
I think, as far as I know, Elo's running. He has not made a post about it yet, but as far as I've been told by my members of the Chinese coalition, is that he is running. So I think that honestly, he is probably the better choice, in my opinion, of the nullsec blocks, as a new candidate. However, obviously I think a large scale of the wormhole entities that have candidates, I think a large part of them will to an extent have the same views as I have. I won't be able to speak to specifically how they view everything that I view, but I think that a large part of the wormhole candidates are to an extent on the same page on the vast majority of the things that will be brought up. At least from what I've been chatting within that community. So I think I would honestly probably say, like, the vast majority of the wormhole of the wormhole candidates, and then mostly probably Elo Knight.
Okay, well with all that said, I'd like to give you a few moments just to make any final remarks and to put a full stop on why you think the listeners should vote for you.
I think the community should vote for me because I am not affiliated with any of the nullsec blocks, which a large amount of people actually aren't this year. And because I'm a member who's played pretty much every aspect of this game to the highest tier, and essentially to avoid getting the whole Gurgoon propaganda machine going up, like essentially we get every year. So essentially just trying to get a new view on everything. Yeah, that's